to me just a couple weeks ago. On October the 17th, I turned 25 years old. Yeah, thank you. There are 3 birthdays that I always looked forward to. 13, because you're no longer a kid, right? You're a teenager. 18, because I could finally go and get my driver's license. And 25, because in my mind there were so many things I could accomplish, and by 25 I can look at myself and say, man, Jermaine, you're really a man. Have you ever thought about what your life will look like when you are 25? You know, like where you work, where you live, if you get to marry that boy or that girl that you have a crush on. That's kind of what I did when I was around 16 or 17. I came up with this picture, this list of things that I thought would make me a man if I had accomplished them by the time I was 25, right? And so tonight I thought it was a good idea to share with you my list, since we're talking about man up and all. So let me go through my list really quickly. Number 1, the first thing I thought was that being 6 foot tall or more would make me a man. I mean, we got the wrong body because I don't like LeBron. I really love Kobe because he's just way better than LeBron. But we'll just take the height, right? So the first thing I thought that would make me a man is being 6 feet taller, 6 feet tall or higher. The next thing that I thought would make me a man is being done with school and having a really high paying job. You see that? You see the money in his right hand and the diploma in his left? The next thing I thought that would make me a man was having a really nice house, a really nice home. The next thing I thought that would make me a man was having a really nice car. You need me just a couple weeks ago. On October the 17th, I turned 25 years old. Yeah, thank you. There are 3 birthdays that I always looked forward to. 13, because you're no longer a kid, right? You're a teenager. 18, because I could finally go and get my driver's license. And 25, because in my mind there were so many things I could accomplish, and by 25 I can look at myself and say, man, Jermaine, you're really a man. Have you ever thought about what your life will look like when you are 25? Like where you work, where you live, if you get to marry that boy or that girl that you have a crush on. That's kind of what I did when I was around 16 or 17. I came up with this picture, this list of things that I thought would make me a man if I had accomplished them by the time I was 25, right? And so tonight I thought it was a good idea to share with you my list, since we're talking about man up and all. So let me go through my list really quickly. Number 1, the first thing I thought was that being 6 foot tall or more would make me a man. I mean, we got the wrong body because I don't like LeBron. I really love Kobe because he's just way better than LeBron. But we'll just take the height, right? So the first thing I thought that would make me a man is being 6 feet taller, 6 feet tall or higher. The next thing that I thought would make me a man is being done with school and having a really high paying job. You see that? You see the money in his right hand and the diploma in his left? The next thing I thought that would make me a man was having a really nice house, a really nice home. The next thing I thought that would make me a man was having a really nice car. You need a high paying job. Dude, I'm so poor I don't even have a wallet. I'm dead serious. have my own home. At the minute, I live with Sammer, and my 2 roommates are here tonight, as a matter of fact. And we live in an apartment building on campus, so fail. Next one, have a really nice car. At the minute, the car that I have used to be David Penuel's grandmother's car. So you can just picture what this car looks like. And then, of course, be married to a really hot wife. Got nothing. Yes. Nothing yet. So the question then becomes, okay, if this is the picture of what I thought a man would be, am I really a man? If this is the criteria that a man is truly measured by, then I'm not. In fact, if this is the criteria for manhood, then I really, really suck at life. And there may be some of you guys in here tonight that have a list that looks like this, maybe the exact same list or something quite similar to it. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with having any of these things, but what I am saying is that if you determine your manhood by a list that looks like this, then you have a false understanding of what it means to be a man. Hear me well. Manhood is not determined by looks, accomplishments, or possessions. What makes a man is who he is and how he lives for God. Let me say that again. Manhood is not determined by looks, accomplishments, possessions. What makes a man really a man is who he is and how he lives for God. So tonight I want to introduce you to 2 very interesting people in the Bible. If you have a Bible, if you have a phone, or if you have eyes, you can look up on the board as the verse comes up there. Acts chapter 13, verse 22. The book of Acts, chapter 13, and verse 22. Let me read it for you real quick. It shows another, right? So what was so special about David that caused God to choose him, and reject King Saul? So there are 4 things that I'll be sharing with you tonight. David was courageous. David was humble. David was compassionate. And David was responsible for his actions. All right, those are the 4 things that I'll present to you tonight. But before we jump into all of that, let me give you a little background so you can understand the picture that we're trying to paint tonight. So the nation of Israel, right, God's chosen people, they were living for hundreds and hundreds of years without a physical king. Because their king was God, right? They had judges, kind of like we do. They had prophets who would speak for God to them. And they had priests who would offer sacrifices, for their sin. But they didn't have an actual king. So one day the Israelites said, man, all these nations around us, they have legit kings that can lead them into battle. But we have nothing. We got this invisible God or whatever. And so they said, we need to get a king just like everybody else. You see, the pressure to be just like the crowd didn't begin with your generation. It started long, long ago. And so God said, all right, since you reject me as your king and you want an actual human king, I'll give one to you. And so in steps the first human king of Israel, King Saul. And we're going to see a little bit of a synopsis of how Saul looked and what he did in a second. And then we're going to use my, you remember my picture and my 5 points of what I thought a man would look like? We'll measure King Saul by that and see if he measures up. Alright? So first of all, let's look at 1 Samuel chapter 9. 1 Samuel chapter 9, we'll read verses 1 and 2. They're up on the screen, so we can just look at those verses on the screen. Alright? So it says, there was a wealthy, influential man named Kish from the tribe of Benjamin. He was the son of Abiel, son of Zeror, son of Bechorath, son of Ephirah, of the tribe of Benjamin. Those are some really hard words to say. His son Saul was the most handsome man in Israel. Head and shoulders taller than anyone else in the land. So this dude seems legit, right? Let's see if he measures up to our list. So think with me, this is the first king of Israel. He's like super tall, super handsome. I mean, he has everything as a king, right? So, number one, was Saul 6 feet tall or more? Probably. Was he done with school and had a high-paying job? I think being king, you get lots of money. So we'll just leave it at that. Have my own home. Did he have his own house? Obviously, a king has a palace, right? Or a castle. Have a really nice car. Obviously, there weren't cars back in those days. They were most likely chariots. So I'm thinking that the king would have the Aston Martin of chariots. Like the best horse, the best wheels with gold spinners on the, make up whatever you want. He had a really nice car. And then be married to a really hot wife. The king just gets whoever he wants, right? So Saul, he got it going for him. He's a man's man. He's the perfect choice for king, right? According to this list. And then in steps another king. We'll kind of fast forward in the story to the point when God rejects Saul as king and he wants a new king in the form of David. Not David Peniel, but David from the Bible. And so God tells his prophet Samuel to go to this guy's house, this guy named Jesse. He had 8 sons. And so God says, I want you to go and I'll show you which one of these sons will be the new king of Israel. So Samuel goes to the house and Jesse is like parading his sons. So obviously he's starting with the tallest, strongest, son that he has. And so they all pass by in front of Samuel the prophet. And Samuel is kind of like, okay, God, this has to be the new king. He looks incredible. Tall, dark, handsome, incredible guns. And God is just like, no, I think I'm going to pass on this one. And he does it over and over and over again. And the point I want to make from that part of the story is that God teaches us a principle that was true then, is true now, and will always be true. Look with me at 1 Samuel 16 and verse 7. It'll come up on the screen, so we'll just read it together. So this is after God had said no to these 7 sons. But the Lord said to Samuel, don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. It seems very clear from this statement that for God, manhood is not determined by how the person looks, how many accomplishments he's had, or what he possesses. For God, what makes a man is who he is and how he lives for God. So God rejected these 7 sons. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 11 and 12, Samuel asked Jesse, are there any more sons? And then Jesse says, there's still the youngest, but he's out in the fields watching the sheep and the goats. It's pretty fun, yes. So Samuel says, send for him at once. We will not sit down to eat until he arrives. So Jesse sent for his son. This is David, by the way. And he was dark and handsome with beautiful eyes. And the Lord said, this is the one. Anoint him. So let's see if David measures up to our list. Our 5-point list. Let's see if David kind of measures up to what it really means to be a man, according to me or according to anyone else. So, be 6 feet tall or more. He was the youngest son, probably small. He didn't really lift any weights, just hung out with sheep and goats. So probably pretty, doesn't mean that. Be done with school and have a high-paying job. I've never gotten paid for, taking care of sheep and goats, but I'm not sure it pays a lot. So we'll give that one a no. Have his own home. He lived at home with his dad. That's all we're gonna say. Have a really nice car. Probably not. And be married to a really hot wife. No. He was single. So David doesn't meet any of the criteria that I've created as to what a real man is. So what made him so special that God chose him over King Saul? So again, we're going to look at the 4 reasons why I think David is a true man, a true picture of a biblical man, while Saul was not. Alright, so number 1, David was courageous and Saul was not. David was courageous and Saul was not. What does it mean to be courageous? Simply put, to be courageous is to have the ability to face difficulty, danger, or pain without fear. So let me kind of paint the picture in your mind of how David was courageous. Let's just use a football field, 100 yards long, and on one end of the football field is the army of Israel, right? And on the other end of the football field is the army of the Philistines. And the Philistines have this big 9-foot tall monster of a soldier named Goliath. And so Goliath is like, dude, let's not waste time. Let's not waste energy. Let's not waste lives. You bring your best warrior to challenge me in a fight in the middle of the field. And whoever wins, that's the nation that wins. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 10 and 11, we have this scene set up. Israel on one side, the Philistines on one side, and Goliath, the champion of the Philistines, saying, send me someone. He's saying, I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me. When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. They were all afraid. Starting from the king. That's kind of like if the president of the if the U.S. were being attacked and you look on a newscast and President Obama or President Bush at the time was like really scared. Like, I really don't know what to do. Can you imagine that? How would you feel if your leader was afraid? So Saul, this dude, he didn't have the ability to face danger and difficulty without fear. He was afraid. So what about David? David comes into this very same situation where Goliath is challenging the Israelites. And look at what he says in 1 Samuel 17 and verse 32. And I want you to just remember that David at this point is probably around 16 or 17 years old. So he's your age. So he comes up to this battle. He looks at the situation. He sees, the king being afraid. And he says, don't worry about this Philistine. I'll go fight him. That would be kind of like Hank walking up to the president of the United States while he's shivering and afraid of making a decision and being like, bro, I got you. Let me take care of this. That's the kind of courage that David had to stand up when no one else wanted to. What about you guys? Do you have that kind of courage to maybe stand up for someone in school who's being teased by those around? Or do you just stay quiet like everyone else? So David was courageous while Saul was not. A true man is one that is filled with courage. You'll hear a lot more about this next week when Sammer comes to bring the message. So I won't dwell on this part about David being courageous. Let's jump to the second point. So David was courageous and Saul was not. And the second mark of biblical manhood is that David was humble while Saul wasn't. So, what's humility? Humility is a modest opinion or estimate of one's own importance, rank, etc. So basically you have a modest idea of who you are. You don't think more of yourself. Since the champion Goliath said, I want to fight just one person. Look at what David says in verse 37 after he decides, dude, I'm going to do it. He tells King Saul, the Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. So he's basically saying, dude, I don't have the strength, I don't have the resources, I don't have the ability, but I'm pretty sure that if God is with me, I got this. So he thought about himself in the right relation to God. He was like, because of God, I can do this. Total dependence. That's a good picture of what it means to be humble. And then on the other hand, we have the awesome king, King Saul. And so after this story happens where David goes and fights Goliath and, kills him, and Israel storms the other army and just wipes them out. So the army is coming back home to Israel and they're celebrating. They're happy that they've won the victory. So look at what happens in 1 Samuel chapter 18 verses 7 and 8. Something very interesting. So while David and the soldiers were coming back home, all the women in the village were excited. So they came up with this song. And this was their song. It says, Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. Look at verse 8. This made Saul very angry. What's this? He said, they credit David with 10,000s and me only with thousands? Next, they'll be making him their king. Saul was jealous. Saul was prideful. Saul was not humble. You see, the moment you begin to think, I'm the man, I'm the one that deserves to be popular, I'm the one that deserves the nicest car, the nicest home, the hottest wife, the moment you think, I deserve this because of me, is when you lose your humility. Let me give you a good example of how you as a Christian man or woman can be humble. By praying. Now, why is prayer a good example of humility? It's because when you pray, what you're literally saying is, God, I don't have the ability, I don't have the power or the resources to do this. And so I'm showing my dependence on you to accomplish whatever this is. So the question to you, the question to me, the question to all of us is, how is your prayer life? How are you showing God that you're dependent on Him? How are you showing humility? So not only was David courageous, but he was humble, while Saul was not. And the third point, David was compassionate, while Saul was not. David was compassionate, while Saul wasn't. So what's compassion? Compassion is feeling or showing sympathy and concern for others. Feeling or showing sympathy and concern for others. We won't look at any scripture passages, so just listen with me as I tell you this story. So, after David had gained all this fame from slaying the giant Goliath, like everyone loved him, and Saul was so mad that he made it his life goal to kill David. He didn't want anyone else to get the credit. He wanted to be the most popular, the most famous one of all. You know you've gone off of the deep end when the recognition that you crave so much consumes you to the point where you would try to remove everything out of the way that would stop you from being recognized. And so for months on months, David was running for his life. And there's a story that happens in the story. You guys just have to read this story for yourself. I mean, in your quiet time sometime this week, 1 Samuel from chapter 13 and onwards. It's an incredible story. It's like a movie playing in your mind as you read it. So David is running away and Saul is chasing after him, right? And so David comes into this city where there are 85 priests of God. And the priests give David food, give David something to drink, and he goes on his way. Not too long after, King Saul arrives and he's like, did you guys see David by any chance? Because I'm trying to kill him. And they say, yeah, we just gave him some bread and some to drink, maybe some Chick-fil-A, whatever. And Saul says, kill them all. Kill them all. And so he ordered all 85 of the priests to be killed just because they weren't helping him in his goal of killing David. This dude was going to the extreme. He was merciless. His jealousy had consumed him to the point where he had no care or concern for anyone else. And then on the other hand, we have David. So a little while after this, while just picture in your mind David just running through forests and mountains, hiding in caves, sleeping, trying to make sure that King Saul doesn't catch up with him. So one night, David and his friends are walking, and they happen to stumble upon, guess who? King Saul and his men asleep. And this is David's perfect chance, right? Dude, just take out the knife and kill him. All your problems will be over. You'll be able to go back home. You'll be good. This is what some of David's friends even began to tell him. Like, this is your chance. Kill him now. David says, nah, dude, I can't do that. I can't touch the Lord's anointed one. In that moment when he could take revenge, David chose to show compassion. Today we live in a world where revenge is the name of the game. I was listening to a song by Taylor Swift this week, and the hook in the chorus, yeah, it was. The hook in the chorus is, there's nothing that I do better than revenge. And at first I was bobbing my head, I was like, yeah. And then I heard I was like, oh, Taylor, I didn't know you spent all that time trying to be a revenge expert, But she's basically saying what our culture says. When someone does something wrong to you, what do? Get even. Come on. You can't let someone walk over you. That's what the culture is telling us. That's what the world is telling us to do. Someone does something bad to you, do something bad back to them. Simple logic. Except that is not in the Bible. That's not what the Bible teaches at all. In fact, the Bible teaches the exact opposite. The Bible tells us in Romans chapter 12 that when people do evil and wicked things to you, you do good things in return to them. You show them compassion even though they don't show it to you. And so when I was even thinking about this, I was like, man, do I really, really have that compassion that a biblical man is supposed to have? So David was courageous. He was humble. He was compassionate. And finally, the last quality that David possessed is that he was a man that took responsibility for his actions. He was a man that took responsibility for his actions. There's a story in the midst of this story where King Saul is is commanded to destroy this army, this people. Like God said, don't even save a cow, don't save a pig, no sheep, no people, no one. Just wipe them all out. And so King Saul just doesn't listen. He does whatever he wants. He keeps the best sheep. He keeps the best goats. He keeps all the good stuff, the treasure, the gold from this army. And so Samuel, God's prophet, comes and says, dude, didn't God tell you to kill everyone? And Saul is like, well, you know, the people were getting really restless, and this guy, he really wanted some money, so I wanted to help him out, and I really wanted to get some of this good stuff. And he makes excuses over and over. He shifts the blame. Like, dude, this isn't my fault. These people, they were pressuring me. So I just gave in. Didn't take responsibility for his actions at all. But on the other hand, we have King David. And there's an interesting story where he sees this really hot woman. And he's like, dude, let me get her. And so he sends his men to bring this woman to his castle. The only problem is, she's married. And her husband is out on the battlefield fighting the war for Israel. You know, so David has an affair with this woman. And so he begins to think, man, like I have to have this really hot wife. What can I do? So he comes up with a plan. He tells his general, the general of his army, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go with this woman's husband into the place where the battle is hardest, where the enemy has the strongest soldiers. I want you to bring him to that part of the battle, and then I want all of you guys to just pull back. Just let him get killed. So David's army general is like, all right, let's do it. So he goes, and exactly as planned, he gets killed in battle. So now David thinks, yes, get in. She's dead, he's dead. Now I can marry this woman. And so he does it. But then the prophet of God comes to David and he says, bro, you think you can do something like that and just get away with it? And so he goes into this long explanation of explaining to David how he has sinned. And let's look at David's response to what this prophet said to him in 2 Samuel chapter 2 for his actions. And what I want us to see specifically from David's life is this. That a true biblical man isn't one who never sins, but one who owns up to his sins. Guys, you, me, we're all going to make mistakes. But the difference between being a true man of God and not is how you respond. So David was courageous, he was humble, he was compassionate, and he took responsibility for his actions. Because manhood is not determined by your looks, your accomplishments, your possessions. What makes a man is who he is and how he lives for God. So just to wrap this up, can we get the picture up on there one more time? My picture with, you know, all the stuff around me. This picture of manhood is a myth. It's a lie from the enemy, from the world, from even ourselves. That is distracting us from what it truly means to be a man. We just looked at 4 qualities that a true biblical man should have. So ask yourself the question. This is what I want you to do. Just look at your life for a little bit and ask yourself, man, am I really courageous? How about my humility? How about my compassion? How about the way I take responsibility for my actions? I ask you to join me in rejecting this myth of manhood and accepting the true biblical meaning of what it means to be a man. So, if after you reflect on your life, after you reflect on your relationships, friendships, you say, man, I don't think I'm that courageous, or I don't think I'm that humble, or compassionate, or responsible for my actions. You have some options. You can talk to your parents about it. You can talk to your small group leaders about it. Just help me walk through this. Help me to see what it truly means to be a man, a biblical man who is humble, who is compassionate, who is courageous, who takes responsibility for his actions. Maybe even have some friends, some of your guy friends, even some of friends that are girls. Right? Because girls, you're supposed to be looking out for these qualities in a true biblical man as well, right? So you gotta help the guys out. And I just want you to know that I'm not one standing at the end of the line, arrived at being a biblical man, saying, you know, guys, like, come to me because I've got it all together. I don't. But what I am saying is that you don't have to journey towards biblical manhood by yourself. You have people all around you who are willing, ready to help you to accomplish it. So remember, manhood is not determined by your looks, by your accomplishments, or by your possessions. What makes a man is who he is and how he lives for God. Let's pray.